A mafia boss overhears his new maid speaking 11 languages to calm the staff. He thinks she's a spy. She's just a refugee survivor protecting orphans overseas. When rivals threaten those children to control him, he doesn't start a war. He erases his enemies so quietly, she never saw the blood, only that the kids were finally safe. Alessio Vitali didn't believe in coincidences. In his world, everything happened for a reason. Every smile hid a knife. Every favor came with a price. And every new face that walked through his door could be the one that put a bullet in his back. That's why, at 34 years old, he slept with a gun under his pillow and had cameras in every corner of his penthouse. That's why he'd survived when better men hadn't. The evening rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Chicago penthouse as Alessio reviewed security reports. The Kavlin Syndicate had been moving shipments through the South Docks again. Bold. Stupid. Or maybe they knew something he didn't. That thought kept him up at night. Mr. Vitali? His head of security, Marcus, knocked twice before entering. Old habit. Alessio had once shot a man who'd barged in unannounced. The new housekeeper is here. Alessio didn't look up from his papers. Background check.
Clean.
Came through St. Catherine's charity program. Been in the city 6 months. No criminal record. No family in the area. Marcus set down a thin folder.
She's.
Nobody, boss. Nobody. That's what they'd said about the last informant too, right before she'd planted listening devices in his study. First week, you watch her, Alessio said flatly. I want to know everywhere she goes, everyone she calls. Already on it. The woman, Mira Santos, according to her file, arrived an hour later. Alessio watched her through the security feed as Marcus led her through the staff entrance. Mid-20s, average height, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple gray dress and carried nothing but a small backpack. Her eyes swept the hallways once, quick and assessing, before she schooled her expression into something softer. Alessio's instincts prickled. That look, that split-second calculation, wasn't the behavior of a simple maid. He made a mental note to have her phone records pulled. For the next 3 days, Mira Santos was invisible. She cleaned efficiently, spoke only when spoken to, and kept her eyes down.
Perfect.
Too perfect. Alessio had learned long ago that people who tried too hard to be invisible usually had the most to hide. On the 4th morning, everything changed. Alessio was in his private gym at dawn, working through his routine, when he heard voices drifting from the kitchen downstairs. Unusual. The staff knew better than to socialize during work hours. He grabbed a towel, irritation simmering, and headed toward the noise. Non capisco perché devi portare questo oggi. An agitated Italian accent. That would be Giorgio, the temperamental chef Alessio tolerated because the man could make a steak that melted on your tongue. I told you 3 times. One of the delivery guys, sounding frustrated.
Then a tir de vase cut through, calm and fluid. Giorgio, lui dice che il suo camion si è rotto. Deve consegnare tutto oggi o il pesce marcirà.
Alessio stopped dead in the hallway. That was Mira, speaking perfect Italian with a northern accent.
Ah.
Giorgio's tone shifted immediately.
Perché non l'hai detto prima?
He did say it, Mira replied, switching seamlessly to English. You weren't listening. Alessio moved closer, staying out of sight. And you? Mira's voice changed again, this time to what sounded like Mandarin. The delivery driver responded, clearly relieved. They went back and forth for a moment before Mira switched to Spanish, apparently addressing someone else entirely. What the hell? Alessio entered the kitchen. The scene froze. Giorgio's mouth hung open mid-gesture. 2 delivery workers stood by the door with boxes. And Mira looked at him with those same soft, deferential eyes that gave away nothing. Mr. Vitali. She dipped her head slightly. I apologize for the noise. There was a misunderstanding about the delivery schedule. I heard. Alessio's gaze locked onto hers. How many languages was that? Sir? Don't play stupid. You just spoke at least 3 languages in under a minute. A pause. Then, 4 actually. Giorgio speaks Italian, Chin speaks Mandarin, and Luis is more comfortable with Spanish. It seemed simpler to accommodate them. For Alessio folded his arms. What else do you speak? For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Uncertainty, maybe. Or calculation. A few others, she said carefully. How many is a few? Mira glanced at the others in the kitchen, then back at Alessio. 11, Mr. Vitali. The room went completely silent. 11 languages. No one learned 11 languages by accident. No one learned them for fun. You learned them because you needed them, because your life depended on it. Or because someone trained you to infiltrate high-value targets. Alessio felt that familiar cold weight settle in his chest. The one that said, this woman is either an incredible asset or a deadly threat. Possibly both. My office, he said quietly.
Now.
Mira set down the dish towel she'd been holding. Of course, she followed him without protest, her footsteps light and measured. Alessio's mind raced. 11 languages. Coming from a church charity. No family. No background. The Kavlin Syndicate had people everywhere. Had they planted her here? Was she gathering intelligence? Recording conversations? Or, and this was somehow worse, was she exactly what she appeared to be, and he was about to lose the first genuinely useful person who'd walked into his life in years. His office door clicked shut behind them. Sit, Alessio said, moving behind his desk. Power position. Control. Mira sat, hands folded in her lap, perfectly composed. I'm going to ask you questions, Alessio began. You're going to answer them truthfully. If I think you're lying, even once, you're done. Understood? Yes, sir. Where did you learn 11 languages? Mira met his eyes.
Réfugié camp.
Orphanages.
Streets.
Wherever I ended up. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Her voice remained steady. My parents died in a car accident when I was 7. I bounced around foster systems in 3 countries before I aged out. You learn languages when your life depends on asking for food in the right words, or when understanding a threat is the difference between safety and she stopped herself. I learned because I had to. Alessio studied her face. No tells.
No nervous habits.
Either she was telling the truth, or she was the best liar he'd ever met. Why Chicago? Work. Stability, a pause. And I send money to an orphanage overseas. The charity program here pays enough for that. Which orphanage? She told him. Alessio made a mental note to verify it within the hour. Who else knows about your language skills? Before today? No one you'd care about. Smart answer. Not quite evasive, but close. Alessio leaned back in his chair. Every instinct screamed at him to dig deeper, to find the crack in her story. But another part of him, the part that had built an empire on recognizing valuable resources, saw something else. Opportunity. You stay, he said finally. But things are going to change around here. Myra's expression didn't shift. How so? You're going to tell me everything you hear. Every language, every conversation, every whisper in this house. And in return, he paused. I'll make sure whoever you're sending money to gets triple what you're making now. He watched for the reaction. For greed. For fear. For the momentary flash that would tell him she was playing him. Instead, Mira just looked tired. I don't want your money, Mr. Vitali, she said quietly. I just want to do my job and be left alone. And that's when Alessio knew. This woman was going to be a problem. Just not the kind he'd expected. Alessio didn't believe her. People who said they didn't want money were either liars or had something more valuable to protect. He'd spent the last 72 hours having Mira watched, her phone records pulled, her background torn apart piece by piece. Everything checked out. The orphanage existed, a struggling facility in Romania housing 23 children. Mira wired the money every 2 weeks like clockwork. No suspicious calls. No encrypted messages. No contact with anyone remotely connected to his world. She was clean, which made her the rarest thing in Alessio's life, someone who wasn't playing an angle. It was 6 in the morning when he found himself standing outside the kitchen again, coffee in hand, listening. He'd been doing this for 3 days now. Observing.
Testing.
Waiting for her to slip. Inside, Mira was handling the morning chaos with unnerving efficiency.
Não, não. Você precisa de descanso português, soft and maternal.
That would be Anna, the older housekeeper who'd been complaining about back pain. Is not so bad, Anna protested. It will be if you keep lifting furniture alone.
Sit.
I'll handle the second floor. A new voice, sharp and aggressive. Russian. One of the exterior security guys, Dmitry, who didn't trust anyone and made it everyone's problem.
Ti cho to, dumai, ti galea that?
Myra's response came without hesitation, her Russian crisp and unflinching. Net.
Je думал, что taj ustali zol, I vnimeska eto na ludakach, которым не платят достаточно, чтоб терпеть это.
Silence. Then Dmitri's surprised laugh. You have teeth, little maid. Good. Alessio found himself almost smiling. She just told Dmitri he was tired and angry and taking it out on people who weren't paid enough to deal with his attitude. And somehow, instead of offense, she'd earned his respect. The kitchen door swung open. Chen, the delivery driver from before, struggled with a heavy box, cursing under his breath in Mandarin.
Sehehis de esitai somble.
Wait, wait, Mira appeared beside him, switching languages again.
Zang vedu bernagana.
Nyobta fingzinu. They maneuvered the box together, Mira giving instructions in fluid Mandarin while simultaneously calling out to Giorgio in Italian about the breakfast schedule. Then a phone rang. Marco, one of the junior guards, answered in rapid Polish, clearly arguing with someone.
Nie mogę teraz.
Powiedzilem. Marco, Myra's voice cut through. She switched to Polish without missing a beat.
Kto dzwoni? To mama.
The guard blinked. Scad, how you know? Because you look guilty and defensive. That's a mother's superpower. She held out her hand. Give me the phone. What followed was a 3-minute conversation where Mira somehow convinced Marco's mother that her son was eating well, working hard, and would visit next Sunday. She did it with such warmth, such genuine care, that even Marco looked touched. When she hung up, she handed the phone back.
She's worried about you.
Call her twice a week. It won't kill you.
Marco nadith, speechless.
Alessio watched all of this from the doorway, his coffee growing cold. This wasn't just linguistic skill. This was something else entirely. Mira didn't just speak languages, she understood people. She read the room, assessed what each person needed, and adjusted herself accordingly. A calming presence for Anna. Sharp wit for Dmitri. Gentle authority for Marco. She was a chameleon. And in Alessio's world, that kind of adaptability was worth more than gold. Mr. Vitali, Marcus appeared at his elbow, voice low. We've got a situation. Alessio tore his gaze away from the kitchen. What kind? The shipment from the docks. It's flagged. Papers don't match the manifest, and it's written in some dialect none of our translators can crack. We've got 2 hours before it gets sent back or seized. Alessio's jaw tightened. The Kavlin Syndicate had been playing games with documentation lately, deliberately using obscure dialects to slow down their competitors. If that shipment got impounded, he'd lose $3 million in product and show weakness. Where's the documentation? On your desk. Alessio strode to his office, Marcus following. The papers were spread across his desk, shipping manifests, customs forms, all stamped and official-looking. But the language was wrong. It looked like French, but the syntax was off. Some kind of regional variation. His regular translator had called it possibly Central African French dialect and given up. Alessio grabbed his phone to call a specialist, then stopped. 11 languages. He turned on his heel and headed back toward the kitchen. Mira was wiping down the counter, humming something soft under her breath. She looked up as Alessio entered, her expression shifting to polite attention. You speak French? He asked without preamble. Yes, sir. Standard, Quebecois, and Congolese. Alessio pulled out his phone, showing her a photo of one of the documents. What about this? Mira took the phone, her eyes scanning the text. Something changed in her face, a flicker of recognition, then careful blankness. It's Lingala-influenced French, she said quietly. Used in parts of Democratic Republic of Congo. This document, she zoomed in. This isn't a regular shipping manifest. Alessio's blood went cold. What is it? Mira looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw fear in her eyes. It's a coded weapons shipment, Mr. Vitali. And whoever wrote this is telling their people that you're the target. The kitchen suddenly felt very small. Come with me, Alessio said. Right now. Because in that moment he realized two things. Mira wasn't just valuable. She'd just become the only thing keeping him alive. Alessio's office had never felt more like an interrogation room. Mira sat in the leather chair across from his desk, her hands steady, but her eyes cautious. Marcus stood by the door, armed and alert. The documents were spread between them like evidence at a crime scene. Read it again, Alessio said, his voice deadly calm. Every word. And this time, tell me what the code means. Myra's fingers traced the text. The surface level is standard shipping information, medical supplies, listed as antibiotics and surgical equipment. But the phrasing is wrong. Here, she pointed. Les étoiles tombent à minuit. The stars fall at midnight. That's not shipping terminology. What is it? A warning. Or a countdown. She moved to another line. And this. Le lion dort pendant les corbeaux est irrassemblant. The lion sleeps while the crows gather. In Lingala-influenced street code, lions represent territory holders. Crows are scavengers, Alessio finished coldly. People waiting for someone to die so they can take what's left. Mira nodded. The shipment is scheduled for midnight, 3 days from now. And based on this notation here, it's not going to your warehouse. It's going to the Kavlin Syndicate staging point on the south side. Marcus swore under his breath. Alessio leaned back, his mind already working through possibilities. The Kavlin Syndicate had been testing him for months. Small encroachments, stolen contracts, bribed officials. But this was different. This was an attack disguised as legitimate business, using a language they knew his people couldn't crack. They'd been planning this for a while. How do you know this? Alessio's eyes locked onto Mira. Not the language, the code. Where did you learn to read coded messages? The silence stretched. Mr. Vitali, I told you. I grew up in
Refugee camp.
I know. I had your story verified. Alessio stood, moving around the desk. Not threatening, just closer. But refugee camps don't teach you military-grade communication codes. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need the truth. How do you know this? Myra's composure cracked, just slightly. She looked away, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter. When you're a young girl alone in a refugee camp in the Congo, you learn things. Not by choice. She met his eyes again. There were militia groups running operations through the camps. They used children as runners, because we were invisible. I delivered messages for 2 years before I escaped. I didn't want to learn their codes. But you remember what keeps you alive. The words landed heavy in the room. Alessio studied her face, the way her jaw tightened, the flicker of old fear in her eyes. He'd seen that look before. Not in liars, but in survivors. People who'd done what they had to do and carried the weight of it forever. How old were you? 12 when it started. 14 when I got out.
Jesus.
Marcus shifted uncomfortably by the door. Even he looked affected. Alessio sat on the edge of his desk, his tone shifting. Why didn't you tell anyone? The charity, the social workers. Tell them what? Myra's laugh was bitter. That I was a child soldier's messenger? That I can decode weapons shipments and militia communications? You think that gets you adopted, Mr. Vitali? Or do you think it gets you flagged by every intelligence agency and deported back to a place where people who know too much disappear? She had a point. So you stayed quiet.
Kept your head down.
Learn enough languages to blend in anywhere. Yes, Myra's voice steadied. I got to Italy, then France, then here. I found work. I found the orphanage. Kids like I was, who needed someone to send them money so they wouldn't end up like me. That's my life. That's all I wanted to be. Alessio processed this. The pieces fit now. The calm efficiency. The ability to read people and situations. The instinctive understanding of danger. Mira hadn't been trained by intelligence agencies. She'd been forged by something worse. The orphanage in Romania, he said. The kids there, they're from conflict zones. Most of them. Syria, Congo, South Sudan. The facility takes the ones other places won't. And you send them almost every dollar you make. It wasn't a question, but Mira nodded anyway. Alessio made a decision. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Tony? I need full financial reports on an orphanage. St. Michael's Relief Center, Romania. I want to know their funding, their debts, their needs. Everything. He paused. And set up a quarterly wire transfer. 200,000 to start. Mira stood abruptly. Mr. Vitali, I don't want. Sit down. Alessio's tone wasn't harsh, just firm. You just saved me from walking into a trap that would have cost me $3 million and probably my life. That orphanage is getting funded whether you like it or not. Consider it payment for services rendered. I don't want to owe you. You don't. Alessio moved back behind his desk. But I owe you. And I pay my debts. Mira sank back into the chair, looking shaken. Here's what's going to happen, Alessio continued. You're going to stay here. You're going to keep doing your job. But when I need something translated, especially anything that looks like this, you're going to help me. In return, those kids get taken care of. Full funding, medical care, education, whatever they need. And if I say no, Alessio met her eyes. Then you walk out that door right now, and I'll still fund the orphanage. Because those kids didn't choose this life any more than you did. For the first time since entering his office, Myra's carefully controlled expression broke. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. Why? She whispered. Because I'm not the monster everyone thinks I am. Alessio's voice was quiet. And because you deserve a life that isn't built on fear. Mira looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, I'll help. Good. Alessio turned to Marcus. Get security doubled. And I want every shipment document from the last 6 months reviewed. As Marcus left, Alessio glanced at Mira one more time. She wasn't just valuable anymore. She was under his protection. And God help anyone who tried to touch her. The warehouse on the South Docks smelled like rust and salt water. Alessio watched from the shadows of a shipping container, Marcus beside him, as his men unloaded wooden crates marked with red cross symbols. Medical supplies from overseas. Legitimate, clean, fully documented. Except they weren't his. Third shipment this month, Marcus murmured. All intercepted before they could reach Kavlan distribution points. They're getting sloppy, Alessio said. Or desperate. The Kavlan syndicate had been hemorrhaging territory for weeks. Every time they tried to move product through the city, Alessio's people were already there. Every bribed official they approached had already been paid more to stay loyal. Every route they opened got shut down within days. They were losing and they knew it, which made them dangerous. One of Alessio's lieutenants, a sharp-eyed man named Ray, approached with a clipboard. Boss, we got a problem with the documentation. What kind of problem? It's in some kind of French, but none of our guys can make sense of it. Could be a decoy shipment. Papers look real enough to pass inspection, but the actual contents might be flagged wrong. Ray handed over a sheaf of documents. We open these crates without knowing what's listed. We could trigger heat we don't need. Alessio took the papers, scanning them. The text swam in front of his eyes. French words mixed with something else, phrases that didn't quite track. The same deliberate obfuscation he'd seen before. Kavlan's signature move. Hold the shipment, Alessio ordered. Don't open anything until I... Mr. Vitali? A quiet voice interrupted. Everyone turned. Mira stood at the warehouse entrance, a thermos in her hands, and a messenger bag over her shoulder. She looked small against the backdrop of industrial steel and armed men, but she didn't flinch under their stares. "What are you doing here?" Alessio's tone came out sharper than intended. Marcus called. "Said you'd been here since 4 a.m. and refused breakfast." She held up the thermos. "I brought coffee." Several of his men exchanged glances. The boss's maid, bringing him coffee at a dock warehouse. It looked domestic. Weak. Alessio caught the looks and filed them away for later. "You didn't need to come down here." "I know." Mira walked forward, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Then she noticed the papers in his hand. "Is that the shipment manifest?" Ray bristled. "That's classified." "Show her." Alessio cut in. Mira set down the thermos and took the documents. Her eyes moved across the pages, and Alessio watched her expression shift. Recognition, then calculation, then something harder. "This isn't medical supplies," she said flatly. "What is it?" "Weapons. Military grade." The French is Ivorian dialect, mixed with coded Bambara phrases. Her finger traced a line.
Remède pour la fièvre, médecine for fever.
That's code for ammunition. And here, equipment chirurgical pour 20 patients, surgical equipment for 20 patients. That's 20 automatic rifles. The warehouse went dead silent. "How much are we looking at?" Alessio asked. Mira flipped through the pages, her lips moving silently as she calculated. Based on the quantities listed, enough to arm about 60 people. Maybe more if they're supplementing with existing stock. Marcus swore. "That's not a shipment. That's prep for a war. Or an assassination," Mira added quietly. She looked at Alessio. "There's a notation here. Livraison spéciale pour le bureau principal, special delivery for the main office." "Mr. Vitali, where's your main office?" "This building. My headquarters downtown." Myra's face went pale. "Then this shipment isn't meant for Kavlin's operations. It's meant for yours. They're going to disguise it as medical supplies, get it past your security, and smuggle weapons directly into your building." The implications hit like a freight train. Ray grabbed his radio. "All units," code red. "Lock down headquarters. Nobody in or out without full inspection." "Wait," Alessio held up a hand, his mind racing. "If we lock down now, Kavlin knows we're onto them. They'll scatter, regroup, try something else. So what do we do?" Marcus asked. Alessio looked at the crates, then at Mira. "Can you rewrite these documents? Make them say what they're supposed to say, actual medical supplies." Yes, probably. But I'd need the right paper stock, the proper stamps." "We have all that. We've been forging customs documents for years." Alessio turned to Ray. "Get her whatever she needs. Myra's going to create a clean manifest for actual medical supplies. Then we're going to let the shipment through to Kavlin." Marcus caught on immediately. "We document everything. Let them take delivery of weapons we've already logged. When they move them, we tip off the feds." "Exactly. We don't just stop the attack. We give law enforcement everything they need to dismantle Kavlin's entire operation." Alessio looked at Mira. "Can you do it?" She hesitated. "Mr. Vitali, if I forge these documents and something goes wrong, if someone gets hurt because I mistranslated something—" "Nothing's going to go wrong," his voice was certain. "You've already saved us once. Trust yourself." Mira stared at him, then at the papers in her hands. Finally, she nodded. "I'll need a quiet space and about 2 hours. Ray, set her up in the office upstairs. Get her everything she asks for." As Ray led Mira away, Marcus moved closer to Alessio. "You sure about this, boss? Trusting her with something this sensitive?" Alessio watched Mira disappear into the warehouse office, her shoulders straight despite the weight of what she'd just been asked to do. "She's not the one I'm worried about," he said quietly. Because in the last 10 minutes, every man in this warehouse had seen exactly how valuable Mira was. They'd seen her decode military intelligence in under 5 minutes. They'd seen Alessio trust her judgment over his own lieutenants. And if his men had seen it, the Kavlin syndicate would eventually see it too. Alessio pulled out his phone and made another call. Tony? I need a security detail. Full-time protection, but keep them invisible. For who? The maid. And make them the best we have. Because Mira had just become his most valuable asset. Which meant she'd also become his greatest vulnerability. And in his world, vulnerabilities didn't last long. The armored SUV cut through Chicago's evening traffic like a shark through dark water. Alessio sat in the back, reviewing intel on his phone. Beside him, Mira perched on the edge of the leather seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd changed from her usual gray uniform into something Marcus had pulled from storage, a simple black dress that looked professional enough for a business meeting. She looked terrified. Breathe, Alessio said without looking up. You're not going to die. You can't promise that. I can, actually. See those 2 cars flanking us? 8 armed men whose only job tonight is making sure nothing happens to anyone in this vehicle. He finally glanced at her. You're safer right now than you've ever been in your life. Mira didn't look convinced. Why am I here, Mr. Vitali? You have professional translators. Negotiators. People trained for this. Because the Kozlov brothers don't trust professional anything. They think polished means fake. Alessio pocketed his phone. They're old-school Russian mob. Been operating in the city for 30 years. They speak English fine, but they conduct real business in Russian, and they code-switch between regional dialects to test whether people really understand them or are just pretending. And if they catch someone pretending, last guy who tried walking out of a meeting with a smile and a handshake, they found him in the river a week later. Myra's face went a shade paler. That's not going to happen tonight, Alessio continued. Because you actually understand Russian. Not textbook Russian, real Russian. The kind people speak when they're deciding whether to kill you. The SUV pulled up to a restaurant in Little Russia, an unassuming place with heavy curtains and no sign. The kind of establishment where regular customers knew better than to ask questions. Marcus opened the door. We're clear. Kozlov's people are already inside. Alessio stepped out, then offered his hand to Mira. She took it, her palm cold against his. Stay close, he murmured. Speak only when spoken to. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you squeeze my arm twice. Understood? Understood. The restaurant's interior was warm and dimly lit. At a corner table sat 3 men. Viktor Kozlov, gray-haired and broad-shouldered, his brother Dmitri, leaner and meaner, and their nephew Anton, young and hungry-looking. Viktor stood as they approached, his smile not reaching his eyes. Vitali. Punctual as always. Viktor, Alessio shook his hand, feeling the strength behind the grip. A test. You remember Marcus. And this is Mira, my translator. Viktor's gaze slid to Mira, assessing. Translator? For what? We speak English. For nuance. Alessio replied smoothly, pulling out a chair for Mira. I like to understand everything being said, even things not meant for my ears. A flicker of respect crossed Viktor's face. Smart. Paranoid, but smart. They sat. A server appeared with vodka and disappeared without a word. The conversation started innocuously, market conditions, territorial agreements, mutual enemies. Alessio had been negotiating with the Kozlov brothers for months about a shipping route that would benefit both families. It was supposed to be simple. But 10 minutes in, Viktor switched to Russian. Dmitri thinks this deal makes us look weak, he said casually, as if discussing the weather. Thinks we should just take the route. Kill Vitali's men, and be done with it. Alessio kept his expression neutral, pretending not to understand. Beside him, Mira sat perfectly still. Dmitri leaned forward, responding in rapid Russian. Not weak, strategic. We kill him now, we fight his entire organization. War costs money. This way, we get what we want, and he thinks it's partnership. Anton laughed. Until we don't need him anymore. Viktor raised his glass. To partnership, then. They all drank. Alessio set down his glass and felt Myra's hand brush his arm. Not 2 squeezes, just a light touch. A warning. So, Alessio said in English, We have an agreement? Equal split on the shipping routes, neutral territory at the exchange points. Of course, Victor replied smoothly.
We are civilized men.
We make deals that benefit everyone. Good. Alessio pulled out a contract. Then you won't mind signing this. Standard terms. Everything we discussed. Victor's smile tightened. You come prepared. Always. As Victor reached for the pen, Mira spoke quietly in Russian. Господин Kozlov, Yedimeu, vy kotait проектият, раздел sem.
Tam jest klauzula, которая может не соответствовать вашим.
Dolgos Rocknim Planov. The table froze. Victor's hand stopped halfway to the paper. His eyes locked onto Mira. You speak Russian? Yes, sir. Mira's voice was steady. And I thought you should know, Section 7 has a clause that might not align with your long-term plans. The silence was deafening. Dimitri's hand moved toward his jacket. Marcus tensed. Alessio remained perfectly calm, watching Victor's face cycle through surprise, anger, and then calculation. What clause? Victor asked slowly. The one about territorial disputes, Mira replied. It specifies that any aggressive action by either party voids the agreement and triggers financial penalties. Given what was discussed earlier about future contingencies, I thought you'd want to review it. She just called them out. In Russian, using their own words against them. Victor stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed, a deep, genuine sound that filled the room. She heard everything, he said to his brother in Russian. Every word we said, this little sparrow was listening. She understands context too, Dimitri replied, looking at Mira with new wariness. Not just words. Intent. Victor turned to Alessio. Where did you find her? Luck, Alessio said simply. Luck. Victor poured another round of vodka. You know what I think, Vitali? I think you're more dangerous than we gave you credit for. A man who brings a translator who actually translates, who doesn't pretend everything is friendship and smiles. That's a man who respects honesty. He raised his glass. To honest partnership. And to knowing exactly where we stand. They drank. This time, the tension had shifted. Not gone. Never gone in this world, but changed. The Kozlov brothers knew they couldn't play games in languages anymore. Couldn't plot in Russian while smiling in English. And they respected Alessio more for it. When they left an hour later, contract signed and terms renegotiated to genuine mutual benefit, Marcus let out a breath he'd been holding. Boss, that was insane, Alessio finished. But it worked. He looked at Mira, who was leaning against the SUV, her face exhausted but relieved. You just prevented a war, he told her quietly. You know that, right? I just translated, she replied.
No.
You gave them truth when they expected deception. That's worth more than any weapon. Mira met his eyes. They were going to kill you after the deal went through. I know. And you knew I'd hear it. I hoped you would. She shook her head, something like wonder in her expression. You're either brilliant or crazy, Mr. Vitali. Can it be both? For the first time since he'd met her, Mira smiled. Really smiled. And Alessio realized his crew was watching them with new understanding. The maid wasn't just staff anymore. She was one of them. The apartment was in a part of Chicago that real estate agents called emerging and everyone else called cheap. Mira climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her studio, her body aching from the tension of the evening. The Kozlov meeting had ended hours ago, but adrenaline still hummed through her veins. She'd prevented a murder tonight. Maybe prevented a war. And all she wanted was to collapse into bed and pretend she was still just a maid. The apartment was small, barely 300 square feet with a kitchenette, a bathroom the size of a closet, and a Murphy bed that didn't fold up properly anymore. But it was hers. The one place in the world where she could let the mask slip. She dropped her bag on the folding chair that served as her only furniture and opened her laptop. 43 unread emails. Most were automated confirmations from wire transfers. But 3 were from Sister Maria at St. Michael's Relief Center, and Myra's stomach twisted as she opened the first one. Mira, Andre's medication has run out again. The pharmacy won't extend credit. We need $800 by Friday, or they'll stop treatment. I'm sorry to ask again. The second email was worse. The roof is leaking in the East Dormitory. 6 children are sleeping in the common room until we can afford repairs. Estimate is $3,000. I've applied for emergency grants, but everything takes months. I don't know what to do. The third email was from yesterday. Mira, please call when you can. We had an incident with immigration officials. They're threatening to separate the Syrian children unless we can prove proper documentation. We need a lawyer. I know you're already doing everything you can.
I'm sorry. We're all so sorry.
Mira closed the laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. The math didn't work. It never worked. She made $2,800 a month working for Alessio, generous for a housekeeper but not enough. Not when the orphanage needed a minimum of $4,000 monthly just to keep the lights on and the children fed. Not when emergencies like Andre's medication or the roof or legal fees came up every few weeks. She'd been supplementing with her savings, but those were nearly gone. Last month she'd skipped meals for a week to send an extra $500. The month before, she'd walked 4 miles to work instead of taking the bus to save $12. And it still wasn't enough. Mira opened her banking app. Current balance, $247. She had rent due in 8 days, $650 for this shoebox apartment. She did the calculation she'd done 1,000 times. If she paid rent, she couldn't send money to Sister Maria. If she sent money to Sister Maria, she'd be evicted. If she was evicted, she'd lose the address Alessio's people had on file, and questions would be asked. Questions led to scrutiny. Scrutiny led to her past being examined. And her past could get her deported. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Wire transfer received, $200,000. Source, anonymous benefactor. Confirmed for St. Michael's Relief Center operations. Mira stared at the screen. $200,000. Alessio. He'd done exactly what he said he would. The orphanage was funded. Andre would get his medication. The roof would be fixed. Sister Maria could hire a lawyer. The children were safe. Myra's hands started shaking. Relief hit her like a physical wave, so intense it was almost painful. For the first time in 3 years, she could breathe without the constant weight of 23 lives depending on her next paycheck. But the relief lasted only a moment before the guilt crashed in. She didn't deserve this. Didn't deserve to have her problems solved by a man whose empire was built on violence. Blood money was still blood money, even if it saved children. Except, was it blood money? Alessio had specified anonymous. Legal channels. Clean transfers that wouldn't taint the orphanage or make the children targets. He'd protected them even from himself. Myra's phone buzzed again. Sister Maria this time, voice message. Mira, I don't know what you did, but we received so much. Sister Maria's voice broke. The children are safe. All of them. The lawyer fees are paid. Andre's medication is ordered. I don't have words. Thank you. God bless you. The message ended. Mira sat on the edge of her broken Murphy bed in her tiny apartment and let herself cry. Not sad tears, exhausted ones. The kind that came when you'd been holding yourself together with wire and prayer, and suddenly the pressure released. She cried for the children she'd carried on her back through refugee camps. For the languages she'd learned by begging in the right words. For the messages she delivered for militias, because saying no meant death. For every choice that hadn't been a choice at all. And she cried because for the first time since she was 7 years old, someone had looked at her burden and said, "Let me carry this with you." Not out of pity, not out of obligation. Because he could. Because she'd helped him. Because in Alessio's strange, violent world, Debts were sacred and protection meant something. Mira wiped her eyes and looked around her apartment. At the single chair, the hot plate, the cardboard box she used as a nightstand. She'd been living like this for 3 years, pouring every dollar into children she'd never met but couldn't abandon. Now she didn't have to. The orphanage was safe. The children would eat, sleep warm, go to school. And Mira could finally let herself think about what she wanted. The thought was terrifying. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from Marcus. Boss says take tomorrow off. You earned it. Mira laughed, a wet, broken sound. Tomorrow off. As if rest could fix 3 years of running on fumes and fear. But maybe it was a start. She opened her laptop again and began typing an email to Sister Maria. Not about money this time. About the children. Their names, their stories, their dreams. The things that mattered more than survival. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mira let herself imagine a future that wasn't just about making it to next month. A future where she could stay in one place. Build something. Maybe even trust someone. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it scared her more than anything else. Because people who stayed in one place became targets. And in Alessio Vitali's world, targets didn't last long. The cafe was one of those trendy places in Lincoln Park with overpriced lattes and exposed brick walls. Mira sat by the window, her laptop open, video calling Sister Maria. On the screen, children crowded around the camera, waving and shouting greetings in half a dozen languages. She waved back, her smile genuine for the first time in days.
Mira,
Look. A little boy named Petru held up a drawing, a house with a bright yellow sun. Sister Maria says, we can paint our room now. It's beautiful, Petru. Make sure you paint a big garden too, okay? She didn't notice the man in the corner watching her. Didn't see him lift his phone and snap 3 photos. Didn't catch the moment he texted someone found her. Vitali's translator. Confirmed. Across the city, in a warehouse that smelled of motor oil and cigarette smoke, Yuri Kavlin studied the photos on his phone. The woman was nobody, plain, unremarkable, exactly the kind of person who could disappear into crowds. But she'd been in the SUV with Vitali 2 nights ago when he'd met with the Kozlov brothers. She'd walked into that meeting looking terrified and walked out with Viktor Kozlov laughing and shaking her hand. Something had changed in that room. The Kozlov brothers had gone from hostile to cooperative overnight. And this woman had been there. Who is she? Yuri asked his lieutenant, a scarred man named Pavel.
Mira Santos.
Official record says she's Vitali's housekeeper. Works through St. Catherine's charity program. Been with him 4 months. Housekeepers don't attend peace talks with the Russians.
Pavel Smirket.
This one speaks 11 languages. Our inside man at the docks said she decoded our entire weapons shipment manifest in under 10 minutes. Vitali's been using her to translate everything, contracts, intelligence, negotiations. Yuri set down his phone, his mind working. Vitali had been untouchable lately. Every move Kavlin made, Vitali was already 3 steps ahead. Every shipment intercepted. Every route blocked. Every ally turned. They'd assumed Vitali had planted spies in their organization.
But what if it was simpler than that?
What if Vitali just understood everything they were saying, in every language, every dialect, every code? She's his edge, Yuri said quietly. She's how he's been beating us. So we kill her. No. Yuri picked up the photos again, zooming in on Myra's face. On the laptop screen visible behind her, where children's faces smiled and waved. We use her.
Pavel frowned.
Use her how? Look at this. Yuri turned the phone around. She's video calling children. Orphans probably, that charity program she came through specializes in refugees. She's sending them money. Caring for them. So everyone has leverage, Pavel. Vitali's leverage is money and violence. But this woman? Yuri smiled coldly. Her leverage is softer. More fragile. He made a call. It was answered on the first ring. I need information on a Romanian orphanage. St. Michael's Relief Center. I want to know everything: staff, children, funding sources, security. And I want it in 2 hours. He hung up and looked at Pavel. We're going to send Vitali's little translator a message. And we're going to make sure she understands exactly what happens when people become valuable to the wrong person. Mira left the cafe at 3 o'clock, her spirits lighter than they'd been in months. The video call with the children had reminded her why she did this. Why every sacrifice mattered. She walked toward the bus stop, already mentally planning dinner prep for Alessio's household. She didn't notice the black sedan idling across the street, didn't see it pull away from the curb and follow her at a distance. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello. Heavy breathing. Then a man's voice, accented, Eastern European, maybe Russian or Ukrainian.
Mira Santos.
You speak many languages. Very impressive. Her blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who knows about St. Michael's Relief Center. About 23 children who depend on you. Such beautiful children. I especially like little Petru. His drawing of the house was very nice. Mira stopped walking. Her heart hammered against her ribs. How do you? You were careless, Miss Santos. Video calls in public places. Very easy to see. Very easy to trace. The voice became harder. Here is what will happen. Tomorrow, you will receive instructions. You will follow them exactly. You will tell Vitali nothing. If you cooperate, the children stay safe. If you don't you dare touch them. Myra's voice shook with fury and fear. They're innocent. They have nothing to do with. They have everything to do with this. You became important to Alessio Vitali. That was your mistake. Now you're going to fix it. What do you want? Information. Schedules. Security protocols. Everything Vitali tells you, you tell us. Every translation you do for him, you share with us. You become our eyes and ears, or those children learn what happens when they become inconvenient. Myra's legs nearly gave out. She leaned against a building, her vision tunneling. I need time. I need to think. You have until tomorrow morning. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. Mira stood on the Chicago sidewalk, people streaming past her, the afternoon sun bright and warm, and felt her entire world collapse. They knew about the children, had somehow found them across an ocean in a facility that was supposed to be safe, had tracked her, followed her, watched her. And now they owned her. She could go to Alessio, tell him everything. He'd protected her before. He'd funded the orphanage. He could send security, hire protection, maybe even evacuate the children. But these people knew about Alessio. They were watching her specifically because she worked for him. If she involved him, if she brought his world crashing into that orphanage, the children would be marked forever. Targets in a war they didn't understand. Even if Alessio saved them once, there would be retaliation. Revenge. An endless cycle of violence with 23 innocent lives caught in the crossfire. Mira walked to the bus stop on autopilot, her mind racing. She'd spent her whole life surviving by staying invisible, by not mattering to anyone powerful, by keeping her head down and her connections severed. And then she'd met Alessio Vitali and made the fatal mistake of becoming valuable. Now children would pay for it. Unless she did exactly what these people wanted. The bus arrived. Mira climbed on, paid her fare, and sat in the back row. She had until tomorrow morning to decide whether to betray the man who'd saved her, or sacrifice the children she'd spent 3 years protecting. There was no right answer. Only survival. And Mira had learned long ago that survival always had a price. Mira didn't sleep. She sat on her Murphy bed until dawn, her phone in her hands, staring at the number she'd memorized but never called. Alessio's private line. The one he'd given her after the Kozlov meeting with strict instructions. If anything ever feels wrong, you call me. Immediately. But she couldn't. Because calling him meant choosing. meant deciding that her own safety mattered more than 23 children who'd already lost everything once. At 6 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from the unknown number. St. Michael's Relief Center. You have 12 hours. Cooperate, or we visit the orphanage personally. Your choice. Attached was a photo, recent, taken yesterday, of the children playing in the courtyard. Petru's yellow drawing was visible on the wall behind them. They were watching.
Right now.
Had people on the ground in Romania. Myra's hands shook so badly, she nearly dropped the phone. She arrived at Alessio's penthouse at 7, moving through her morning routine like a ghost. Made coffee. Prepared breakfast. Set the table. Everything mechanical. Automatic, while her mind screamed. Alessio emerged from his study at 8, dressed for meetings, his expression sharp with focus. He barely glanced at her. Morning. The Denison contract needs translating. Some of the supplier clauses are in Mandarin. Documents are on my desk. Of course, Mr. Vitali. He paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips. You look terrible. You sick. Just tired. Then go rest. Marcus can handle. No, the word came out too sharp. Mira forced herself to soften.
I've fine.
I'll handle the translation. Alessio studied her for a moment, those dark eyes reading something in her face. But he didn't push. Just nodded and returned to his study. Mira stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter, trying to breathe. She could do this. Translate the contract. Send copies to the Kavlin Syndicate. Give them what they wanted. Keep the children safe. Just become the spy they needed her to be. Her phone buzzed again. Tick-tock, Miss Santos. Something inside Mira snapped. She walked to Alessio's study and knocked once before entering. He looked up from his desk, surprised. The contract's right. I need to tell you something. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned. And I need you to not interrupt until I'm finished. Alessio's expression shifted immediately.
He closed his laptop.
Sit down. I'd rather stand. Mira. Yesterday afternoon, I received a call. From someone connected to the Kavlin Syndicate, the words tumbled out, faster and faster. They know about the orphanage. They have people watching the children right now in Romania. They want me to spy on you, translate everything, copy documents, report your security protocols. If I don't cooperate by tonight, they're going to hurt the children. The silence that followed was deafening. Alessio stood slowly, his face unreadable. Show me the messages. Mira handed over her phone with trembling hands. He read through everything, the texts, the photo, the threats. His jaw tightened with each word, but his expression remained carefully controlled. Why didn't you call me last night? His voice was quiet. Dangerous. Because... Myra's voice cracked. Because if I involve you, those children become targets forever. Your world, your enemies, your violence. It follows everyone you touch. I've seen what happens to people caught in the crossfire. They don't survive. So, you were just going to betray me? Feed information to my enemies. I don't know. The words burst out of her. I don't know what I was going to do. All night I sat there trying to figure out how to save them without destroying everything, and there's no answer. There's no version of this where everyone lives. Alessio set down her phone. You should have called me.
Why?
So you could start a war? Send men to Romania? Turn that orphanage into a battlefield? Myra's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Those kids have already survived genocide, war, famine. They came to that place to be safe. And I brought violence to their doorstep just by existing in your life. This isn't your fault. Yes, it is. Myra's voice rose. I should have stayed invisible. Should have kept my head down and my mouth shut like I've done my whole life. But I got comfortable. I let myself matter to someone powerful. And now children are going to pay for my mistake. Alessio moved around his desk, stopping a few feet from her. Look at me. Mira shook her head, staring at the floor.
Mira.
Look at me. She forced herself to meet his eyes. Those children are not going to be hurt, Alessio said, his voice absolute. Not today. Not ever. I give you my word. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. Because I'm going to end this. Tonight. Mira laughed, a bitter, broken sound.
How?
By attacking Kavlin? They'll retaliate. They'll be gone before they get the chance. Alessio's expression was cold steel. You think the Kozlov meeting was impressive? You haven't seen what I can do when someone threatens what's mine. The words hung in the air. I'm not yours, Mira whispered. The hell you're not, Alessio's voice was rough. You're under my protection. That orphanage is under my protection. Those kids are under my protection. And anyone who touches them learns why people fear my name. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're going to turn this into bloodshed. No, Alessio cut her off. I'm going to turn this into a disappearance. The Kavlin Syndicate is going to cease to exist, and it's going to look like bad business decisions and legal troubles.
No bodies. No headlines.
Just strategic collapse. Mira stared at him. You can do that. I've been planning it for months. They just gave me the perfect reason to accelerate the timeline. He pulled out his phone. Marcus? Conference room. 30 minutes. Bring everyone. He hung up and looked back at Mira. You're going to stay here today. You're not going to contact Kavlin. You're not going to do anything except trust me to handle this. The children will have armed security within 2 hours. Legal, professional, completely clean. Funded through a Swiss philanthropy group with no connection to me. They'll think it's a government grant. Tears finally spilled down Myra's cheeks. Why are you doing this? Alessio stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fury and something else, something softer, in his eyes. Because you came to me, even though you were terrified, even though you thought it would make everything worse. You chose to trust me instead of facing this alone. His voice dropped. That means something. You mean something. I'm just. Don't. His hand caught her chin, gentle but firm. Don't diminish yourself. You're the bravest person I've ever met, and I've met killers and kings. You survived things that would break most people, and you spent 3 years keeping children safe. You think I don't see that? You think I don't understand what that takes? Mira couldn't speak, could barely breathe. You deserved a life that wasn't built on fear, Alessio said quietly. I told you that once. I meant it, and I'm going to make sure you get it. He released her chin and stepped back. Now go rest. You look like you haven't slept. This will be over by morning. Mira wanted to argue, wanted to protest that he couldn't promise, that couldn't guarantee safety in a world this violent. But she was so tired. And for the first time since that phone call, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The war room in Alessio's penthouse was sleek and windowless, a place where strategies were born and enemies disappeared. Marcus stood at the head of the table, a digital map of Chicago glowing on the screen behind him. 12 of Alessio's most trusted people filled the room. No one spoke. They'd learned to wait for the boss. Alessio entered, his expression cold and focused. The Kavlin Syndicate threatened someone under my protection. As of now, they're finished. Not wounded, finished. I want them erased so completely that in 6 months, people will forget they ever existed. Ray, the logistics expert, pulled up files on his tablet. Kavlin operates through 17 fronts: shipping companies, nightclubs, restaurants. Their real money comes from 3 sources: weapons trafficking through the South Docks, money laundering through a chain of pawn shops, and protection rackets in Little Ukraine. Not anymore, Alessio said. Marcus, I want our weapons suppliers flipped. Every contact, every source. Offer them triple what Kavlin pays. Make it clear that continuing business with Kavlin is a career-ending decision. Marcus nodded, already typing. Considered done. Tony. Alessio turned to his financial specialist. Kavlin moves money through 6 shell corporations, all tied to accounts in the Cayman Islands. I want those accounts frozen. Work with our people at the banks. Legal pressure, regulatory audits, whatever it takes. Cut off their cash flow. Tony grinned. They'll be bankrupt by Thursday. Ray, the protection rackets. I want every business owner they're extorting to receive anonymous payments, enough to cover 6 months of what they've been paying Kavlin. Include a letter explaining that they're now under different protection. Free protection. Ray raised an eyebrow. Boss, that's going to cost us close to $2 million. I don't care. Those people have been terrorized long enough. And when Kavlin comes collecting and finds out their victims don't need them anymore, they'll realize how powerless they've become. The room buzzed with quiet energy. This wasn't the usual approach, swift and brutal. This was surgical, systematic. What about their safe houses? Someone asked. I want locations on all of them. Then anonymous tips to law enforcement about code violations, drug activity, whatever sticks. Get building inspectors involved. Make those locations toxic. Alessio pulled up another file. They have a warehouse in Pilsen where they store product before distribution. It's going to have a gas leak tomorrow. Not enough to hurt anyone, just enough to condemn the building. Marcus whistled low. You're not leaving them anything. That's the point. Alessio's voice was ice. They threaten children to get to me. So I'm going to show them what happens when you make that mistake. For the next 4 hours, Alessio orchestrated a campaign of systematic destruction.
No bullets. No bodies.
Just relentless pressure applied to every weak point in the Kavlin operation. Their weapon suppliers received visits from men who politely explained that their business relationships were changing. 2 of them agreed immediately. The third tried to negotiate and found his entire shipment mysteriously seized by customs the next day. The shell corporations began collapsing as banks suddenly discovered irregularities in their accounts. Transfers were frozen. Assets were seized pending investigation. The investigations would take months Kavlin didn't have. The safe houses became liability nightmares. One failed a fire safety inspection. Another was raided based on an anonymous tip about illegal gambling. A third was condemned after inspectors found structural damage that had definitely not been there the week before. The protection rackets crumbled as business owners found envelopes of cash and letters promising safety. When Kavlin's enforcers came to collect, they were met with refusals backed by new security systems and suddenly brave shop owners who knew someone bigger was watching. Within 48 hours, Yuri Kavlin's empire was hemorrhaging from 1,000 invisible cuts. Boss, Marcus reported on the 3rd day. Kavlin's scrambling. They pulled their people from the orphanage, too busy dealing with fires here. And our security team is in place in Romania. Military contractors, all legal, funded through that Swiss charity, like you said. Alessio allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The children? Safe. Don't even know anything changed except they have better locks on the doors now. Good. What about Kavlin's response? That's the beautiful part. They don't know who to hit back at. Every business deal that fell apart looks legitimate. Every supplier who left made an economic choice. Every safe house that got raided was just bad luck. On paper, they're just having the worst week in history. Ray entered with fresh intel. You're going to love this. Kavlin's partners are abandoning ship. The Volkov crew in New York just cut ties. Said they don't work with incompetent operations. The cartels are pulling their product. Without weapons to move and no cash to buy new inventory, Kavlin's got maybe 2 weeks before they're completely done. Make it 1 week, Alessio said. I want the final move to be perfect. What's the final move? Alessio pulled up a file he'd been saving. Yuri Kavlin's been skimming from his own organization for years. $10 million sitting in a personal account his brothers don't know about. Tomorrow, evidence of that account gets leaked to Dmitry and Pavel Kavlin. The room went silent. You're going to make them kill each other, Marcus said slowly. I'm going to make them tear themselves apart from the inside. When criminals can't trust their own family, they have nothing. Alessio closed the file. By the end of the week, the Kavlin syndicate will be a footnote. Their territories will be absorbed by families who actually understand honor. And Yuri Kavlin will be lucky if his own brothers let him live long enough to leave the city. What about the threat to Mira? Alessio's expression hardened. That dies with their organization. No Kavlin syndicate means no one left who knows she was ever valuable. She goes back to being invisible. Safe. Marcus nodded slowly. This is some next-level chess, boss. This is what happens when someone threatens what matters, Alessio stood. We're not at war. We're conducting a controlled demolition. And when the dust settles, I want the entire city to understand. You can come at me with guns, you can come at me with threats, but if you touch the people under my protection, you don't get a quick death. You get erased. The meeting ended. His people dispersed to execute their assignments. Alessio returned to his study and pulled up the security feed showing Mira asleep in one of the guest rooms. She'd finally crashed around noon, exhaustion winning over fear. She looked peaceful, young, like someone who deserved better than the life she'd been given. He told her this would be over by morning.
It would be.
Because Alessio Vitali kept his promises. And the Kavlin Syndicate had just learned the most expensive lesson of their lives. Some debts could only be paid in absolute destruction. The city would whisper about this for years. About how Vitali hadn't just beaten his enemies, he'd made them vanish like smoke. But Alessio didn't care about reputation. He cared about the woman sleeping in his guest room who trusted him with the only thing she had left to protect. And he'd be damned if he let her down. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Relief Center, casting colored patterns across the worn wooden floor. Mira stood in the courtyard, her heart in her throat, watching the children play. She'd taken the first flight she could afford, 22 hours of travel through 3 connections, barely sleeping, terror gnawing at her with every mile. Alessio had told her not to come, had promised the children were safe. But she needed to see them with her own eyes. Sister Maria emerged from the main building, her weathered face breaking into a surprised smile. Mira, we weren't expecting you. What a wonderful... She stopped, reading Myra's expression. What's wrong? Are they okay? Myra's voice cracked. All of them? No one's been hurt. Hurt? Of course not. Why would? Sister Maria's eyes widened.
Oh, child.
You heard about the security upgrades. Security upgrades?
Yes.
The most miraculous thing happened. 4 days ago, representatives from a Swiss charitable foundation arrived. They said we'd been selected for a safety enhancement grant, new locks, security cameras, even trained personnel to monitor the grounds. Sister Maria gestured toward the entrance where 2 professional-looking men in civilian clothes stood watch. They've been wonderful. Very kind with the children. Background checks all cleared through international agencies. Completely legitimate. Myra's legs felt weak. When did they arrive? Let me think. Tuesday morning.
Very early.
I remember, because I hadn't even made coffee yet. Tuesday morning. The same day she told Alessio about the threat. He'd had people on the ground in Romania within hours. Have there been any strangers? Anyone watching the facility? Sister Maria frowned. Actually, yes. Monday evening, a man was parked across the street for several hours. Made me nervous. But Tuesday, after our new security arrived, he left. Haven't seen him since. She squeezed Myra's hand. Whatever you were worried about, I think it's taken care of. We've never been safer. Mira walked through the facility in a daze. Everything looked the same, but different. New locks on every door. Cameras positioned discreetly in corners. The 2 guards, ex-military by their bearing, who smiled at the children but whose eyes constantly scanned for threats. She found Petru in the art room, adding flowers to his yellow house drawing. Mira, he launched himself at her, small arms wrapping tight. Did you see? We have security, like important buildings now. I saw. Mira hugged him back, breathing in the scent of paint and childhood. Are you scared? Scared?
No.
The security men are nice. Anton taught me how to say hello in 6 languages. And Sister Maria says we're important enough to protect now. Like a museum. Other children gathered around, chattering about the excitement of the past week. None of them knew they'd been in danger. To them, this was just another strange piece of good fortune, like the donation that had fixed the roof, or the grant that kept them fed. They were safe. Genuinely, completely safe. And they had no idea what had almost happened to them. Mira spent the day with the children, reading stories and helping with lessons, trying to absorb the reality. Alessio had done exactly what he'd promised. Protected them without violence, without creating new enemies, without leaving any trace that connected them to his world. That evening, she sat with Sister Maria in the small office, watching the sun set over the courtyard. "Mira," Sister Maria said gently, "I've known you for 3 years. I've watched you sacrifice everything for these children. You've been their lifeline." She paused. "But you've never visited before. Never had the money for the flight. What changed?" Mira was quiet for a long moment. "I met someone who gave me the resources I needed. The same person who arranged the security." "I think so." Sister Maria studied her. "This person must care about you very much. He cares about keeping his word, perhaps. Or perhaps he cares about protecting what matters to you, because you matter to him." The old nun smiled. "I've learned that the two aren't so different." Mira left Romania the next morning, her heart lighter but more confused than ever. The flight back gave her 22 hours to think. About Alessio keeping his promise. About the surgical precision of his protection, effective but invisible, leaving the children untouched by his world. About how he could have used this situation to bind her to him, to make her owe him, but instead had simply solved the problem because he said he would. She landed in Chicago exhausted and took a cab directly to Alessio's penthouse. It was nearly midnight when she arrived. Marcus looked surprised to see her, but buzzed her up without comment. Alessio was in his study, surrounded by papers and laptop screens. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "You went to Romania?" "Yes. I told you not to worry. That they were safe." "I know. I needed to see for myself." Mira stepped closer. "The security. The foundation. It's real. Completely legitimate. The children think they won a grant. They did. From a charity organization that you control." Alessio didn't deny it. "One of many. That particular one specializes in refugee facilities. Been running it for 6 years. Completely legal, fully audited. No connection to anything else I do." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you didn't need to know. The children are safe. That's what matters." Mira sank into the chair across from his desk. "What happened to the Kavlin syndicate?"
Gone.
"Gone how? Does it matter?" Alessio's voice was quiet. "No one died. No blood was spilled. They just stopped existing. Their business partners left. Their resources dried up. Their organization collapsed from internal paranoia. Last I heard, Yuri Kavlin fled the country with whatever money he could grab before his brothers caught up with him. You destroyed an entire criminal empire in less than a week. I protected what was mine. I'm not." "Yes, you are." Alessio set down his pen, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You became mine the moment you walked into my office and told me the truth instead of betraying me. You became mine when you trusted me to keep the children safe. That's not ownership, Mira. That's..." He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "That's what?" Mira whispered. "That's someone finally mattering enough that I'd burn down an empire to keep them safe." His voice was rough. "And I don't apologize for it." Mira felt tears prick her eyes. "You fought a war without staining my world. That was the point." "Why?" Alessio stood and moved around the desk, stopping in front of her. "Because you deserved a life that wasn't built on fear." "I told you that." "I meant it. I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything. Just stay." His hand reached out, hesitated, then gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "Let me be the one who carries the weight for once. Let me protect what matters to you, because you matter to me." Mira looked up at this complicated, dangerous man who'd just dismantled an organization to keep children safe. Who'd waged war without firing a shot. Who'd kept his promise even though she'd given him no reason to. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "Good," Alessio said softly. "That makes 2 of us." They stood there in the quiet study, not quite touching but connected by something neither could name. And for the first time since she was 7 years old, Mira let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could stop running. 3 weeks passed like a held breath. The Kavlin syndicate's collapse made headlines for exactly 2 days before the news cycle moved on. Crime organization crumbles under federal investigation, the papers said. No mention of Alessio. No connection to anything violent. Just another criminal enterprise that had rotted from within. The city moved on. Business continued. Territory that had belonged to Kavlin was quietly absorbed by families who understood the new order. Alessio Vitali's protection meant something, and his enemies simply disappeared. Mira returned to her routines, cleaning, organizing, being invisible in the way she'd perfected. But something had shifted. The other staff treated her differently now, with respect that bordered on deference. Marcus nodded to her in hallways. Ray asked her opinion on documents without being prompted. Even Giorgio insisted on making her special meals. She'd become part of the family without realizing it. But she and Alessio barely spoke. He was busy, meetings, negotiations, consolidating power. She was careful, maintaining distance, keeping boundaries, not presuming anything just because he'd saved her. They orbited each other like planets, pulled by gravity, but never quite colliding. Until one evening when Mira found herself on the penthouse rooftop. She discovered it by accident 2 weeks ago, a private terrace with a garden that someone clearly maintained but no one seemed to use. It had become her refuge. A place to think.
To breathe.
To wonder what came next. She was sitting on the stone bench, watching the Chicago skyline glitter in the darkness, when she heard footsteps behind her. "I thought I was the only one who came up here," Alessio's voice said. Mira turned. He stood in the doorway, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, looking more human than she'd ever seen him.
"I'm sorry."
"I didn't mean to intrude." "I can." "Stay." He moved to the edge of the terrace, hands in his pockets. "I used to come up here when my father was alive. It was the only place in the building he couldn't reach me." Mira hadn't known he'd had a father in this building. Hadn't known much about him at all, really, beyond the reputation. What was he like? Cruel. Paranoid. Brilliant. Alessio's voice was flat. He taught me that trust was weakness and mercy was suicide. That the only way to survive in this world was to be harder, colder, more ruthless than everyone else. "Is that what you believe?" Alessio was quiet for a moment. "I used to. Then I met someone who'd survived worse than I ever had, and she did it with kindness instead of cruelty. Made me wonder if my father was wrong about a lot of things." Myra's breath caught. "Alessio." "Don't," he turned to face her. "Let me say this. I've been trying to figure out how to say it for 3 weeks, and I'm just going to." He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "At caring about someone." The words came out rough. "At wanting someone safe more than I want them useful. At lying awake wondering if I made the right call, if I did enough, if you're okay." Mira stood, her heart hammering. "You did more than enough. You saved the children. You kept your promise." "I didn't do it because of a promise." Alessio stepped closer. "I did it because the thought of you being afraid, of you carrying that weight alone, was unbearable. I've done terrible things, Mira. I've hurt people. Destroyed lives. I'm not a good man. I know what you are. And you're still here." "Yes." "Why?" Mira looked at him, really looked, at the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he maintained over everything, including himself. "Because you gave me something no one else ever has," she said quietly.
"A choice."
"You could have used the children as leverage.
Could have made me dependent on you.
Could have trapped me in your world and made it impossible to leave." She stepped closer. "But you didn't. You protected them and asked nothing in return. You gave me power instead of taking it away. That's why I'm still here. I need you to understand something." Alessio's voice dropped. "My world is dangerous. People I care about become targets. Staying close to me means living with that risk. I've lived with risk my entire life. This is different." "How?" "Because now you have something to lose." His hand reached up, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. Before, you had nothing. You could disappear, start over, survive. But now you have the orphanage funded. You have security. You have stability. Staying in my life could cost you all of that. Mira understood what he was offering. An out. Permission to leave without guilt or consequence. What about you? She asked. What do you have to lose? Alessio's expression cracked, just slightly. Everything that matters. The confession hung between them. You told me once that I deserved a life that wasn't built on fear, Mira said softly. What do you deserve, Alessio? He looked away. I don't think about that. Maybe you should. They stood on the rooftop, the city sprawling below them, two people who'd survived impossible things trying to figure out if survival was enough. I can't promise you normal, Alessio said finally. I can't promise you safe. All I can promise is that I will protect what matters to you because you matter to me. And if you choose to stay, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that choice. Mira felt tears slip down her cheeks. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. It wasn't supposed to be romantic. It was supposed to be honest. It was both. Alessio's thumb brushed away her tears, his touch careful, reverent. I'm not asking for an answer now, he said quietly. I'm just asking you to think about it. About what you want. Not what's safe or practical or logical. What you actually want. Mira had spent her entire life not being allowed to want things. Wants were dangerous. Wants got you hurt. But standing here, looking at this man who dismantled an empire to keep children safe, who'd given her choices instead of demands, who looked at her like she was something precious instead of useful. She let herself want. I'm scared, she whispered. Good. That means it matters. What if I'm not brave enough? You survived child soldiers and refugee camps. You learned 11 languages to stay alive. You spent 3 years keeping children safe on poverty wages. Alessio's voice was certain. You're the bravest person I know. The question isn't whether you're brave enough. It's whether I am. They stood together in the darkness, not quite touching, but not quite separate either. Connected by something fragile and new and terrifying. Something that felt like the beginning of home. Stay tonight, Alessio said. Not a command. A request. Not in the guest room. Here. With me. Just. Stay. Mira looked at him, at the vulnerability he was showing, the risk he was taking by asking. And she nodded. They sat together on the stone bench, her head eventually finding his shoulder, his arm carefully circling her waist. Not lovers yet. Not quite. Just two survivors learning how to be something other than alone. The city lights glittered below them like promises. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mira let herself believe in one. 6 months later. The community center stood in what used to be Kavlan territory, a 3-story building that had once been an abandoned factory. Now it gleamed with fresh paint and new windows, the sign above the entrance reading, New Horizons Community Center, in 6 languages. Mira stood in the main room, watching volunteers arrange chairs for the evening's ESL class. The space hummed with life, children's laughter from the art room upstairs, the smell of food from the community kitchen, the quiet murmur of people who'd found sanctuary. Miss Santos. A teenage girl approached, her English heavily accented. The donations from the food bank arrived. Where should we put them? Storage room B. Thank you, Amara. Mira smiled. And remember, you're teaching the beginner English class tonight. You ready? Amara's face lit up. Yes. I practiced all week. Mira watched her go, pride swelling in her chest. Amara had arrived 4 months ago, a refugee from Eritrea, with nowhere to go. Now she was teaching others, finding purpose, building a life. The center had opened 3 months ago, funded through a complex web of legitimate charities and philanthropic grants. On paper, Alessio Vitali had no connection to it whatsoever. In reality, every dollar had been carefully laundered through legal channels, transformed from criminal enterprise into genuine social good. It was Myra's project. Her vision. Her purpose. And Alessio had made it possible, without ever putting his name on it. "You're doing it again," a familiar voice said behind her. Mira turned to find Alessio leaning against the doorframe, dressed down in jeans and a dark sweater. He looked almost normal. Almost like someone who didn't run half the city's underground. "Doing what?" "That thing where you look at this place like you can't believe it's real." He moved closer. "It's been 3 months. When are you going to accept that you built something that lasts?" "When I stop expecting it to disappear." Alessio's expression softened. He understood that fear. The inability to trust good things. They'd been navigating this relationship carefully, slowly. Some nights Mira stayed at the penthouse, curled against him while he worked late. Other nights she retreated to her apartment, larger now, safer, but still hers. They had dinner together twice a week. He attended her community center events, sitting in the back row, never drawing attention. It was slow.
Tentative.
Built on choice rather than need. And it was the healthiest thing either of them had ever had. Sister Maria called. Mira said, changing the subject. "The kids want to visit for Christmas. All 23 of them. We'll make it happen. I'll arrange travel, security." Alessio, Mira touched his arm. "They can just fly commercial. They don't need. They're flying private. With security." Non-negotiable, his tone left no room for argument. "Those kids are under my protection same as you. I don't take chances with that." Mira shook her head, but she was smiling. "You're impossible. You like that about me." "Maybe." He caught her hand, threading their fingers together. The gesture was casual now, comfortable. 6 months ago, it would have felt presumptuous. Now it felt natural. "Walk with me?" he asked. They left through the back entrance, moving through the neighborhood. It was evening, the streets busy, with people heading home from work. No one gave them a second glance. Just another couple walking through the city. "I got offered a position," Mira said as they walked. "Director of International Refugee Services for the city. It's a real job with the government. Good salary, benefits, everything legitimate." Alessio's step faltered. That's incredible. When do you start?" "I haven't accepted yet." "Why not?" Mira stopped walking, turning to face him. "Because it would mean questions about my background. Deep vetting. They'd want to verify everything. My work history, my references, my connections." She met his eyes. "They'd discover you. And I don't know if I'm ready to explain what you are to me to people who wouldn't understand." Alessio was quiet for a long moment. "What am I to you?" The question hung in the air. Mira had avoided defining this. Avoided labels and commitments and anything that felt too permanent. Because permanent things could be taken away. But standing here, looking at the man who'd given her everything without demanding anything, she found the words. "You're the person who taught me that protection doesn't have to mean possession. That caring for someone doesn't mean controlling them." Her voice was steady. "You're the person who gave me choices when everyone else only gave me orders. She paused, gathering courage. "You're home. Even when that terrifies me." Alessio's breath caught. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle and certain. "Take the job," he said quietly. "But..."
"Take it."
"Build your career. Make a difference in ways I never could." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I'll handle the vetting. I have people who are very good at making backgrounds look exactly how they need to look. Legal, clean, unconnected to anything problematic. You do that." "Mira," his voice was rough with emotion. "I would do anything to see you free. Anything to watch you build the life you deserve. That's what love is. Wanting someone's happiness more than you want to keep them close." The word hung between them.
Love.
The first time either had said it. Myra's eyes filled. "You love me." "Terribly."
Completely.
"In ways that probably aren't healthy, but are definitely permanent." A small smile. "Is that okay?" Instead of answering, Mira pulled him down and kissed him. Soft at first, then deeper. Pouring 6 months of careful distance and hard-won trust into the connection. When they broke apart, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she whispered. "Even though you're a criminal, and I'm supposed to know better." especially because you know better. They stood together on a Chicago street corner, two people who'd survived the worst the world had to offer and found each other anyway. Not a fairy tale, not perfect, but real, built on honesty and respect and the revolutionary act of choosing each other every single day. Come on, Alessio said, taking her hand again. Let's get back. You have an English class to supervise. And you have. What? Criminal empire things. Legitimate business ventures that happen to require strategic thinking. Totally different. Mira laughed, the sound free and genuine. They walked back to the community center together, and Mira realized something profound. She wasn't running anymore. Wasn't hiding. Wasn't just surviving. She was living, building, choosing. And the man beside her, complicated, dangerous, impossibly good to her, was choosing her right back. Not because she was useful. Not because she was trapped. But because she'd walked into his life speaking 11 languages and taught him the most important one, the language of trust. Inside the center, life continued. Children played. Volunteers taught. Refugees found hope. And in the back office, Mira kept a photograph. 23 smiling children in Romania, safe and thriving, surrounded by security that looked like good fortune. Proof that sometimes miracles came from unexpected places. Sometimes they came from mafia bosses who heard a maid speak 11 languages and decided she deserved a life built on something other than fear. Sometimes they came from having the courage to stay when running was safer. And sometimes they came from two broken people learning that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up every day, making the choice to be together even when it was complicated. Especially when it was complicated. That evening, as Mira taught vocabulary to a room full of hopeful faces, she glanced out the window and saw Alessio in the courtyard, teaching a group of teenage boys basic self-defense, practical skills delivered with patience she never would have expected. He caught her looking and smiled. Not the controlled expression he showed the world, but something real and warm and just for her. She smiled back. And in that moment, Mira understood. She hadn't been saved by Alessio Vitali. She'd been seen, valued, given space to become who she was always meant to be. And that, more than any rescue, any protection, any grand gesture, was love. The kind that lasted. The kind worth choosing. Every single day.